We're talking about a time of crisis and compromise in the United States. And all of these issues that we're talking about kind of come from the slavery thing and keeping states even, slave states versus free states. Now yesterday we told you that New Orleans was ground zero for the slave trade. And we also told you that the slave trade in the South was worth about $2 billion a year in today's dollars. It was a big, big business. Okay, so Jamie, Luna, tell the class here how much a male slave sold for approximately in 1840.
He's going over the notes. If you'd write them down, it would be nice.
About $1,000, which was how much in today's dollars? About $28,000. So
Write it down.
a male sold for approximately $1,000 in 1840, $28,000. Branson, how much did a female go for? About $800, which was how much in today? About $23,000. Yeah, if I say it, we should say it. About $23,000 in today's dollars. Okay? Have you raised your hand? William, how much a child was worth? $500, which is approximately how much in today's dollars? $14,000. So you can see that these were just like cattle. They were worth a lot of money. And they would, prior to purchase, these slaves would be evaluated like prized animals. They were fattened up for sale just like you would a steer before you butchered them at market. They dyed the hair of the older slaves because they really never knew how old they were to hide the fact they were older and had gray hair so they could get more money for them. Why, Willow, did the possible buyers check the slaves for scars on their backs? That means they're troublemaker or rebellious, and they might not sell for as much money as one that did not. That was more accustomed to doing what they were told. And they preferred female slaves that were light-skinned and virgins for breeding purposes because they wanted to, it was like breeding cattle. The more money you make, every time a calf drops on the ground when you're raising cattle, that's cha-ching, cha-ching. And it was no different in the slave trade as well. Now, we mentioned that yesterday, even free black men that would be foolish enough to travel in the vicinity of the Deep South would be kidnapped and returned to New Orleans and sold as slaves even though they weren't. They'd take away their papers, and who's going to believe a black man at this time? So you had to be a little bit careful. And also, we told you it was illegal to split up a child from their mother if they were under the age of 11, which wasn't really followed as well. And I used the example of the Nelson family, a large family here in New Orleans. All of a sudden, we're back in 1840, and his family is a group of slaves, and dad goes here, and mom goes here, and sister goes here, and brother goes here, and brother goes here, and sister goes here. It was heart-wrenching to see these families split apart. Can you imagine a 5-year-old child being separated from their mother in the slave trade? You'll see examples when I show you some of this on video. We also said that even Negro slaves would refuse to eat so they couldn't be fattened up for slaughter to protest the way they were treated, and what owners would do is they would simply knock out their teeth and feed them through a funnel. Brutal, brutal treatment. Now, because of this brutal treatment, Ollie, we told you that many slaves ran away. If they got caught, give me an example of what could happen to them when they were returned. They would cut off their ears. Logan, how about another example of what a runaway might expect if they're caught?
They'd cut their Achilles.
They'd cut their Achilles tendon so they could not run. And Willow, what might be another? They would brand them to know in the future that they were runaways. Okay? We talked about Frederick Douglass, who was a famous Negro who escaped aboard a train in Baltimore, Maryland. He borrowed one of his friend's identification papers. The conductor didn't look at the papers very clearly. He was able to get on the train and go to freedom, and he became the first ever real civil rights leader in America. Not quite as famous as the one we know more modern day as Martin Luther King Jr. But Frederick Douglass became the first civil rights leader in American history. We also talked about Harriet Tubman and her Underground Railroad, in which she risked everything as a free slave to try to get others through the Underground Railroad to safety and away from slavery, and it was estimated that approximately 60,000 slaves escaped through her Underground Railroad, and it cost the South about $50 million in loss. She was so hated by the South that they put a more than $1 million bounty on her head, and she was never caught. Ironically, Harriet Tubman died 28 days after Rosa Parks was born, who became the lady in the 1950s who refused to give her seat up to a white man and was arrested and started the civil rights movement in America in the 1950s and 60s.
I thought it was $40,000 more.
And their money,
Oh, yeah.
1.1 million in ours.
Why is that so unwrong?
Well, because they both stood for civil rights. I mean, and Rosa Parks, you'll really understand that more when we get to Rosa Parks and hear about the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, but it's just ironic. I just tell you that now to kind of set you up, because when we get there, I'll say, now remember we compared her to Harriet Tubman. Okay, now yesterday, this is important you understand for those that are gone, we talked about the Missouri Compromise, and it all started in 1819, when the first clash between North and South that will eventually lead us to Civil War came. And what happened is in 1819, Alabama was admitted into the Union as a slave state. And when they admitted Alabama into the Union, we then had 11 slave states and 11 free states. And everybody was happy, North and South, because it was even. Well, all of a sudden, Missouri, the Missouri Territory, wanted to come in as a slave state. And this upset people in the North because it would upset the balance. It would now be 12 slave states and 11 free states, and people were very, very upset about that. And so a fellow by the name of James Talmadge of New York offered an amendment to Missouri's application, and this amendment became known as the Talmadge Amendment. Now, what did his amendment propose? Brody, can you tell me what his amendment to Missouri's entrance into the Union, one of the things it stated? Okay, they would allow Missouri to come in as a slave state, but you're right, no other slaves would be allowed into the state. What about the slaves that were there, Jordan? What's their story? If you already lived in the Missouri Territory, you're just a slave for life. Okay, Donovan, what happened to the children of those slaves that were in the Missouri Territory that were slaves for life? What would happen to the children born to them?
After the kids became 25, they would become free.
Right, they would become free after the age of 25. Now, when this amendment went to Congress, Megan, how'd the vote go? Kind of give me a summation of the vote in Congress on his amendment.
The House said yes and the Senate said no.
Very good. The House voted for it and the Senate voted against it, which meant we had a deadlock in Congress. Whenever you have a deadlock, you have to come up with some sort of a compromise. And so the following compromise was agreed upon by both houses of Congress. Okay? They would admit Missouri into the Union as a slave state, temporarily giving one more slave state than free state. But the second part of the compromise is Maine would be allowed into the Union as a free state, which would restore the balance, right, to 12 to 12. But what was the third part of that? Cesar?
Isn't it like something about, like, I don't know what?
This is called the 36th parallel.
Yeah, above that, it's three states.
Right. Above the 36th parallel, right here, everything above that would be forever free of slavery. Everything below that would be slavery. Now, there's a lot more land up here than down here, right? Huh? So, Anthony, why did the South agree to that if there's so much more land north of the 36th parallel than south?
There's like cotton, right?
Yeah, what about cotton?
There's like no cotton.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of cotton up in the northern part of Minnesota, right? So all the cotton growing was going to be south of the 36th parallel here, so to speak, and so they agreed to it. Now that's going to come back to bite us in the butt later on, and we'll talk about that, okay? And that's kind of where we finished yesterday, or not? Yeah. Okay, now, is the balance of free and slave states even? Yes, it is, 12 to 12. Well, this compromise that we just explained to you is known in American history as the Missouri Compromise. The amendment is not the compromise, right? The compromise is the three things that resulted after the amendment became deadlocked, in Congress. Now, just to kind of let you know, in 1844, Texas came into the Union as what type of state? We should know this. Slave. And Florida came in right afterwards, also as slave. So now we got a two-state imbalance by 1845. Because you got Texas coming in, and we kind of talked about this, and Florida coming in. Texas in 1844, Florida in 1845. How many slave states?
14. Sorry.
We had 11 to 11. Missouri comes in, Maine, 12, 13, 14. We got 14, 14. No, we got 14, 12, excuse me. Well, that caused some controversy. However, two more states came in, one in 1846, Iowa, and the other in 1848, Wisconsin,
They're both free.
which were free, very good, that balanced it back up at what? 14 each. Those would be Iowa, 1848, Wisconsin, or Iowa, 1846, Wisconsin, 1848. And we got to keep score here, make sure we do that right. So we got 14 to 14 right now, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Now, this is where it's going to get a little bit interesting, because our next topic is opinions vary concerning new land acquired from Mexico. What are we going to do with this land that we acquired when we won the Mexican War? There's going to be a debate over that. Because what again is the issue? Slavery versus non-slavery. So now all of a sudden we picked up this land from Mexico, and people are going to have differing opinions on where they should stay as far as slave and free. Okay, let's talk about that. There were 5 very important American politicians that had 4 different opinions on what ought to be done with this land that we got from Mexico. And I'll tell you all about it in a minute, but I want to make sure you understand that. So we're going to have 5 very prominent politicians in American history at the time who are going to give 4 different opinions on what should be done, which tells you that 2 of the politicians had the same opinion. Okay? So, as a result of the American victory over Mexico in the Mexican War, the United States acquires new land, and 5 prominent American politicians have 4 different opinions on what should be done with these new lands. Who is the most important politician at this time? President James K. Polk. Very good. Now here's what his opinion was on the land that we acquired from Mexico. So here's our first opinion, and it comes from President Polk. What's he going to point at that we just talked about? The Missouri Compromise of 1820 that stated anything above the 36th parallel would be not slavery. So, President Polk's opinion is, we'll just settle this issue over the lands we acquired from Mexico by saying there'll be no slavery north of 36. That's what he said. Makes sense, right? So Polk says, you know what? This is simple. All this land right here, we've already got this in as its state, right? So are they counting? We're talking about here. We're talking about here. Okay? And President Polk says, well, that's simple. Yeah.
So at the time, did they have Wyoming or not?
Oh, no. No.
So the problem's gonna be that they're all coming in as states.
Well, not maybe. We'll talk about it. That's a good point. So what Polk thinks, the president, no problem. All this land we acquired, anything north of the 36th is free. Anything south is slave. Well, there was a Democratic congressman by the name of David Wilmot. David Wilmot, who's on your ID sheet. And he opposed slavery in any of the new lands that we acquired from Mexico. Congressman David Wilmot, he's a Democrat, opposes slavery in any of the new lands that were acquired from Mexico. He said we shouldn't have slavery in any of these lands. They all should be free of slavery. That was his opinion. You remember old John C. Calhoun? Does that ring a bell? One of the famous three? Well, he's elderly now. He's older. And he insists that Congress has no right to prohibit slavery in any of the lands acquired from Mexico. He thinks that, he doesn't say, he's pro-slavery, but he doesn't say every person and every bit of land that we acquired from Mexico should be slavery or not slavery. He simply says that Congress has no right to prohibit slavery. So, Polk believes, let's just use the Missouri Compromise. Let's just use the 36th parallel. David Wilmot, a Democratic congressman, he's a little bit radical. He says, I don't think there should be any slavery in any of the lands we acquired from Mexico. And the elder statesman, John C. Calhoun, basically states Congress has no right to prohibit slavery anywhere in those lands. If those people want to be slave owners, they should be. Okay? The federal government should stay out of it. Remember, what was he for? Federal rights or state rights? He was really big into states' rights. Okay? Now, the other two that have the same opinion are both senators. Michigan Senator Lewis Cass and Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas. Their opinion is that the citizens of each territory should decide whether or not to permit slavery in their territory. So they're more for not states' rights because they're territories, but they're for what?
States' right.
Territorial rights. We don't write it down, but we'll later talk about it. It's called popular sovereignty. And what popular sovereignty is you take a poll of the people that live in an area, and the majority rules. If the majority wants slavery, it's slavery. If a majority wants not slavery, it's not slavery. So there's your four differing opinions. First of all, President Polk believes just settle it by the Missouri Compromise. Everything north of 36 will be free, and everything south of 36 will be slave. Democratic Congressman David Wilmot opposes slavery in any of the new lands that we got from Mexico. The elder statesman John C. Calhoun simply states, Congress, you have no right to prohibit slavery anywhere. He's leaning kind of towards which?
Slavery.
Well, yeah, but he's kind of leaning towards Michigan Senator Lewis Cass and Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas, who are stating that the citizens of each territory should vote and decide what they want to do. Those are the four differing opinions at this point. Yeah, he was from Illinois. Do you have a question?
Yeah, what happened with Missouri? I'm kind of confused.
They became a state, a slave state.
It would have been a free state because of 36 on it.
Yeah, but see, that's a very good point. That was part of the compromise. We'll go ahead and put Missouri in now, but everyone from this point on will use the line. That's a good point. Okay? Now, right in the middle of this controversy, what do we have, Jordan? Our next subtopic, what do we have? A presidential election. And what's going to be a topic? What to do with the lands we got from Mexico. So, we'll go to the election of 1848. And the problem of slavery in the Mexican territories is going to be the hot topic that's discussed. Election of 1848. This is going to be kind of a surprise, this election. Holy smokes. What's that?
We still have the
We're going to talk about that. Now, we have both the Democratic Party and the Whig Party. And neither one is going to take a firm stand on the issue. They're going to ignore the issue of Mexican territory. Why? Why do people that are really good people, Leilani, in this community not run for the school board? Well, you know, I think of someone like Dr. Page, or I think of somebody who's a business, Caleb Kinlan, okay, or Dr. Nelson, or the State Farm agent, what's his name?
Jake.
Not that.
It's Ken something, but I can't think
Yeah.
of the last name.
Why don't good people like this run for the school board, Willow?
They don't want to be hated.
Which might lead to what?
Downfall.
Which might lead to what?
War.
No income.
No, if I'm mad at Dr. Nelson because he's on the school board and made a decision I didn't like, I don't go to Dr. Nelson anymore and have my teeth fixed.
That's
A lot of people don't do it because it hurts business. The reason why neither the Democratic Party nor the Whig Party took a firm stand on the issue is they were afraid it would cost them the election. That people would not vote. Yeah.
What about the Liberty Party?
We're gonna get to this, okay? Okay, now, President Polk decided that he did not want to run for re-election on the Democratic side again. So the man that steps in and gets the Democratic Party nominee is Senator Lewis Cass of Michigan, who we just talked about. So obviously, what's he going to support during the campaign? No, letting the people in the territories decide. So Lewis Cass of Michigan is going to be the Democratic candidate for president. A good politician, but obviously you've never heard of him, have you? So he probably didn't make it. We'll talk about what happened. Now, the Whig Party nominated General Zachary Taylor from the Mexican War, right? That's who the Whig Party nominates, General Zachary Taylor. This guy has absolutely no political experience whatsoever. He didn't even have any political views. He really didn't even, in a way, belong to a political party. He was so far from being a politician, it wasn't even funny. What was he? A military general. He was no politician, but that's who the Whig Party nominated. Well, because you have not very strong parties is when a third party normally comes in. And it's not the Liberal